Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Casual Criminalist Christmas special, which I'm always nervous to approve because like my production process doesn't really work very well for like special episodes, things going out on specific dates, because I make a lot of videos and generally I'm just like, they'll go out when they go out. There's no rush. Don't make anything too timely. Don't make anything for special occasions. But Angus was like, Simon, I really want to do a Christmas one. Simon, make my Christmas dreams come true. It was like September or whatever. And I was like, okay, we'll do it. Make it bloody short. So he did.
Oh, thank God for that.
It was the night before Christmas, and the bank was being robbed. They were told to keep quiet, but some customers still sobbed. 4 men with guns had entered, and one was dressed as St. Nick, though the Santa wasn't jolly. In fact, he was a prick. "Hands up!" yelled the bandits, and the teller did comply. She knew if she resisted that she would surely die. Bang! Clank went the bank safe. The robbers had broken in, and filling Santa's sack full, they scampered with a grin. Some words just don't rhyme. 1927, Isthmus. The story of when Santa Claus very nearly stole Christmas. Yes, what do you rhyme with Christmas? Isthmus. Great, good stuff.
He is very resourceful.
Welcome one and all to this very special Christmas edition of the Casual Criminalist. In today's light-hearted episode, we'll be talking about that most Christmassy of topics, bank robbery. So, get comfy, have a sip of your favorite tipple, and allow me to spin you a yarn about one time Santa and his elves robbed a bank in Texas. I wish I was having a tipple right now. Like, I wish I was in a Christmas mood. Like, when this goes out, I'll be on holiday. It'll be nice. It'll be the evening somewhere. And no, instead it's just like, 1:15 on a Thursday afternoon. Woo! And I got a lot to do. All I want for Christmas is money. It's December 1927, the golden age of bank robbery. The infamous John Dillinger was robbing his way all around Texas, and at this point in history, bank robbery had become something of a national pastime in the US. The problem was so bad that the Texas Bankers Association had offered to pay $5,000 to anyone that killed a fleeing bank robber. I've made a video all about that and how it went horribly wrong. Because people were like, looks like that guy's robbing the bank. Kill him quickly. There was way too much vigilantism. We find the protagonist of today's video, Marshall Rayliff, living in a boarding house in the small Texas town of Wichita Falls. 1 week earlier, Rayliff had been released from prison after serving only 19 months of a 19-year sentence for bank robbery. Holy shit, that guy made out like a bandit, if you'll excuse the pun. That's very light on such a long sentence. Following the robbery, he had hidden out in a small town called Cisco, but had been tracked down by the town sheriff, one G.E. Bedford. Despite, or perhaps because of his very early release from a sentence that would have taken some of the best years of his life, Ratliff wasn't in a reformed kind of mood. After leaving prison, Ratliff had sought out 3 accomplices to the robbery for which he had been convicted. Yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, okay, so you go to prison and they let you out super early. You'd be like, oh, thank God they let me out of prison early. I thought I was going to be here for 19 years. I'm never going to commit a crime again. That's what you hope for. But the reality is, it's like, they let me out early. I got a 19-year sentence. Sweet. Next time, then you get like your next sentence, you just assume you'll be let out early as well. That's not good. Finding 2 of them in Wichita Falls, and only a week after his release, he was already planning his next robbery and had already chosen the next location. While hiding out in Cisco, the town where he was captured, Ratliff had spied a mighty fine-looking bank for whatever reason. It had stuck with him during prison, and it's here that he would commit the crimes for which he is most known. The 2 accomplices he found in Wichita Falls were Henry Helms, the getaway driver, and Robert Hill, the firearms expert. The 3rd safecracker had been Ratliff's brother, Lee, but he was now in prison on an unrelated offense. It just so happened that a relative of Henry Helms, Lewis Davis, knew a good bit about picking locks and was looking for some extra cash around Christmas time.
Yeah, me too.
The lock picker. He's like, how am I going to make some extra money? I'm going to rob banks. What he really should have done is started a YouTube channel, Binding on 2. Anyone else love that channel, that lock-picking lawyer guy? Although they always appear in my image, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to watch the shit out of that. As we all know, compromise is the key to success, and Ratliff was in no mood to let small things like good planning get in the way of his plan. As such, the list of preparations went as follows: get guns, get a first aid kit, and that's it. Robert Hill supplied the ammo, 5 pistols and 2 machine guns that they armed themselves with, and Henry Helms would acquire the car. As the day approached, Ratliff, in all his omniscience, spotted a flaw in their meticulous plan. What if he was spotted by the sheriff on his way into town? That might spell the undoing of all of their hard work, and it must be avoided. So his solution to being spotted was to wear a stolen Santa suit in broad daylight 2 days before Christmas. Yeah, it's like, that's inconspicuous, mate. Well done. Santa Claus is coming to town. On the morning of the 23rd, the crew were ready to put their plan into action. Ratliff, dressed as Santa, left the boarding house with his elves in tow, ready to spread some Christmas cheer. Spread some Christmas bank robbery. Henry Helms was waiting outside the boarding house with a stolen vehicle. After loading their provisions, the crew piled into the 4-door sedan and set off for the 2-hour journey that would bring them to the Cisco First National Bank. It's shocking to think that at no point during this 2-hour car journey, not one of them looked around and thought this was perhaps a bad plan. Several blocks from the bank, Ratliff exited the car, swung his empty sack over his shoulder, and began making his merry way down the road. In a twist that I'm sure all of you saw coming, local children spotted jolly old St. Nick striding down the street. Small Santas weren't yet commonplace, so seeing Santa walking up the street 2 days before Christmas was kind of a big deal. Yeah, even today when, people dress in Santa costumes all the time. People are still going to be looking at you wearing a giant Santa costume, and if they weren't even common, it's going to be even more of a scene. This is an insane plan. Soon Ratliff found himself mobbed by children eager to meet Santa. To his credit, Santa played his part well, laughing and answering the kids' questions and patting them on the head. After shaking most of the kids off, Santa continued to make his way into the center of town, meeting his elves in the alleyway adjacent to the bank. Santa was first into the bank, still followed by several children who wanted to see where Santa was going. He's going to go fill his sack. Oh, he's getting some gifts for himself. Upon his arrival, there were several chuckles from the bank staff and patrons. A bank cashier that was free gave Santa a friendly "Hello, Santa," but received no response. Robert Hill was the next to enter, brandishing his pistol at the cashier and yelling at her to put her hands up. Shortly after, Henry Helms and Lewis Davis followed him in, both wielding pistols. Those kids are going to be traumatized for life.
Santa, is there a back way out of this place?
They're going to be at some, mall in the future, sitting on Santa's knee. I'm just absolutely terrified. Then Santa reached under his shirt, extricating 2 9mm pistols from his rotund belly. Is Santa dual-wielding? Holy shit. I think that's something that's not actually done, despite what, James Bond video games from the early 2000s, late 90s will tell you. Dual wielding is just it's a great way to be inaccurate with 2 guns rather than accurate with 1. Especially dual wielding Uzis and stuff. And I've shot an Uzi. It's a horrible gun. It's a horrible gun that is way too heavy and way too underpowered and just a bit silly. But it looks cool, and movies have told me it's cool. But it's rubbish. Santa then moved to the cashier's desk, forcing his way through the partition and bringing Lewis Davis with him. Once in the partitioned area, Ratliff told Davis to start working on the vault door before turning his gun on the teller and telling them to open the safe. Meanwhile, Hill kept an eye on all the customers and clerks while Helms watched for a police response. In all the kerfuffle, and unbeknownst to Santa and his elves, a woman, Mrs. B. Blansengam, and her daughter Frances had heard that Santa was in town and had been spotted entering the bank. The pair entered the bank from a back entrance that led into the alley where the gang had parked their car. It was only after they entered that they observed the robbery taking place. Immediately, Mrs. Blassingame grabbed Frances and tried to escape back the way she came. As she turned, the robbers spotted her and yelled out for her to stop, but she ignored them, carrying her daughter as she went. One of the bandits gave chase, but by the time he had made it into the alley, she had already turned the corner and was out of sight. Back in the bank, Ratliff was aware that the woman had gotten away and figured the police wouldn't be long afterwards. Growing impatient with his safecracker, who was still struggling with the bank's vault, he once again turned his guns on the bank teller and asked if she knew how to open it, which she did. After a moment, they'd broken in and begun filling Santa's sack with their ill-gotten loot. Meanwhile, Mrs. Blassengame was running the entire distance to the town hall, screaming the words, "They're robbing the bank," as she went. Oh yeah, it's 1927. I was like, why is she just not using a phone? Because it's 100 years ago. This, of course, caught the attention of a great many people who were out doing their Christmas shopping, including the town sheriff, G.E. Bedford, the same sheriff that had tracked Ratliff down the previous year. Sheriff Bedford was a giant of a man, thick-set, and a veteran of the police force. Immediately hearing the cries of the distressed Mrs. Blasingame, he jumped up from his desk, grabbed his riot gun, and gathered his 2 deputies around him, R.T. Reddies and George Carmichael. He instructed Reddies and Carmichael to cover the back exits of the bank while he would approach from the front. Meanwhile, Ratliff and co. had nearly emptied the vault and had armed themselves for a shootout, retrieving the machine guns that had been stowed in the car. The police were yet to arrive at the scene, but the robbers had noticed that they had a far larger problem than the police to deal with, that being the inhabitants of Cisco itself. Remember the $5,000 reward? Oh my god, is this one of those examples where everyone's like, I'm gonna get my $5,000, and $5,000 in like 1927. I'm just absolutely guessing here, but it's going to be like $100,000. So there's a ton of people who are going to be arriving with guns, all very keen on killing some bank robbers. Holy sh**. That's worth about $85,000 today. That was bloody close to $100,000, to be honest. Well, the townsfolk of Cisco were keen to get that juicy payout for Christmas and had flocked to the bank upon hearing Mrs. Blasinghame's cries. This being Texas, all of them were already armed. Is that really the case? Is everyone walking around Texas with guns? Surely like 90-something% of people aren't wearing guns. Maybe they're for guns, maybe they have guns at home, but I don't think they're mostly wearing guns all the time, right?
Sure we are.
So by the time the sheriff and his deputies had arrived, there was already a crowd of armed civilians waiting outside the bank. Don't shoot me, Santa. Things had gone downhill like a proverbial snowball for Santa and his elves. Tensions within the bank were raised to boiling point when Ratliff's nemesis, Marshal Bedford, arrived on the scene. Before any of the bandits had even discussed a new plan of escape, the shooting had begun, and once it had begun, it did not stop. The street that was just 15 minutes earlier bustling with families and goodwill turned into a GTA mission. At first, it was a few shots from the police officers and the public. Then Ratliff fired into the bank ceiling to show that they were armed. At the same time, Richard Hill was checking to see if the back alley was clear, but he was met by the sheriff's deputies who opened fire when they saw him. Hill, who was now dual-wielding his own pistols, holy sh**, especially like pistols from like the 1920s. Are you going to be able to hit anything while dual-wielding some old-school pistols? At the sound of the gun battle raging in the back alley, all hell broke loose at the front of the bank. Santa and his remaining elves found themselves pinned down under a hailstorm of bullets. Santa and his elves are dead. There's no way these guys are getting out of this alive, right? Maybe one elf, somehow, when he surrenders. But these guys are screwed.
You're not gonna make it!
The ensuing pandemonium gave cover for a postmaster within the bank to grab a hidden rifle and also open fire on the robbers who returned fire on him. Lewis Davis was shot in the shoulder and the postmaster was shot in the leg. As more and more bullets poured into the bank, civilian casualties began to pile up. A cashier was hit in the jaw by a stray bullet and a customer was hit in the leg. Under the cover of confusion, another bank customer was able to slip out of the front door and inform the sheriff that Santa had taken 2 little girls hostage, Laverne Corner, 12, and Emma May Robertson, 10. Eventually, Ratliff ordered that all of those that remained in the bank to the exit via the back alley where a car was waiting. As the hostages poured out, several more civilian casualties were sustained by strayed bullets from both the general public and the deputies that were waiting in the alley. For their part, Ratliff and his elves waited for the hostages to clear the alley before making their exit. Seeing the crowd of hostages leaving the alley, Sheriff Bedford ran around to the alley entrance and spotted the robbers making the way to their car. At the same time, the last of their hostages cleared out and the 2 deputies got a clear shot. All 3 officers opened fire at the same time, seemingly unconcerned or unaware that Santa's little human shields were still in the firing line. In the ensuing shootout, Deputy Carmichael was fatally shot. Seeing this, his partner, Officer Reddies, ran over to where his comrade had fallen and tried to revive him. The crew had almost made it out of the car when they saw Sheriff Bedford had placed himself right in the middle of their escape route and was firing on them with a shotgun. This is fully into a GTA mission. This is insane. This is like, that bounty was such a bad idea. Because yes, obviously it's good to like catch bank robbers, but when you're incentivizing people so massively to go kill people, you get GTA missions. As the battle raged on, several armed civilians joined in at either ends of the alley. The absolute chaos of the situation meant that nobody really knew who or where to shoot. By the time the shooting was over, 6 civilians had been wounded, Lewis Davis had been severely wounded, Ratliff had been shot in the leg and the chin, and Sheriff Bedford had been shot 5 times before finally going down. The robbers managed to make their escape, but it would be foolish to think that they were out of the woods. They had just turned this quiet Texas street into a war zone, shot the sheriff, shot the deputy, robbed the bank, besmirched the good name of Santa Claus, and top it all off, completely ruined Christmas. I'm kind of in a way, I'm absolutely amazed that these guys have got away. so far. I thought they are going to end up in as a bloody pool on the bank floor or in the alley. Surely. But no, they've made it away. There was absolutely no way the townsfolk were going to let this go unanswered. After doing what he could for his dying partner, Officer Reddy's attempted to pursue Santa's sleigh on foot before being picked up by a member of the angry mob that had formed. Now, I know hindsight is 20/20 and all, but I feel that some of this chaos could have been avoided by better planning, such as remembering to fill the car with fuel, which they forgot to do. And it was a matter made worse when a member of the angry mob shot out their tires. In spite of all their excellent planning, it was clear their current plan was untenable, and the crew abandoned the car, carjacking a passing vehicle driven by a 14-year-old because, well, the past everybody. Vacating his car, he managed not to become another inadvertent victim of the mob as he went. The robbers loaded the injured Lewis into the Oldsmobile, packed their money into the boot, jumped in, and then realized that the driver had taken the keys with him. I feel the phrase comedy of errors comes to mind. Oh my god, can you imagine carjacking and the person's just like by, instinct just grab, because you leave your car, you grab, I don't know, I'm in my car, keys are always just like in that little central console compartment-y thing. I always grab them. It's just a reflex. Grab that, grab my phone. If I was getting carjacked, I'd probably make an effort to grab the keys and grab the phone. Not because I'm an idiot or I want them, just because it's what I do every time I leave the car. In a last-ditch attempt to flee, they got out of the Oldsmobile and returned to their original car. Davis had passed out from blood loss by now, so had to be left behind. The remaining 3 robbers and 2 hostages got back into the car and managed to get moving again. Soon they had left the majority of the mob behind, but they were still being pursued by several trucks. The chase continued down the highway for several miles, all the while exchanging shots, and concluded when the crew turned down a dirt road and began throwing roofing nails out of a shattered back window. This allowed them to lose their partners when they threw their battered car off-road into a thicket of undergrowth. Which was just as well, because less than a mile later, their car finally bit the desert dust. Not only had the Texas mob turned the exterior paneling into something resembling Swiss cheese, the fuel tank had been entirely ripped apart and the tires had been reduced to little decorations on the hubcaps. As they extricated themselves from the car, I'd imagine they were feeling a little shell-shocked. However, it was worth it, and they'd gotten what they came for. They had managed to steal $12,400 in cash and $150,000 of negotiable securities, worth a collective $2.2 million today. A pretty good haul that they had absolutely not just left behind in the boot of the Oldsmobile. No. Oh my god, that's amazing. An unmerry little Christmas. Yes, that's right, they'd gone through all that and left the bloody money behind. First, when the police found the sack of money along with the dying accomplice, they gave up the search, giving the remaining bandits time to distance themselves. They managed to lay low as the search began to ramp up. As news spread, law enforcement from all over the state converged on the area to assist with the search. Still, the group remained unfound throughout the night and managed to steal another car from a small family farm the following morning, taking another hostage in the process. As they drove away in their commandeered vehicle, the father of the hostage saw what was happening and shot at the fleeing vehicle, but missed the robbers and hit his son. Oh, dude. No. And if you needed any more evidence that these were perhaps the stupidest criminals we've ever featured, following another night in the Texas wilderness, they decided to return to Cisco on Christmas Day. What, you smoking crack? Why on earth would you do that? Somehow nobody recognized the group that had robbed them just 2 days before. Yeah, because no one's insane enough to think that the robbers are coming back. They stayed just long enough to get some fuel, supplies, and hopefully some soap before leaving the town. With the option to put some serious distance between them and the ones searching for them, our band of boneheaded bandits decided to drive 45 minutes down the road and then settle into a boarding house for the night. What are you doing? Just drive and keep on driving until you're really far away, and then drive some more and then drive some more. Maybe cross an international border. Come on.
You know what to do.
The following day, they were leaving town and they ran into a police checkpoint. Seeing 3 heavily armed men sitting in a stolen car, the police rightly suspected that something was up and arrested them. Good police work there. They were having none of it and drove away, leading to another police chase that ended when the gang drove into an oil field and crashed into an oil derrick. They once again abandoned their car and fled on foot. This time, though, they wouldn't make it far. The officer pursuing them was Deputy Sheriff Cy Bradford, a seasoned veteran of the Texas Rangers and one of the best shots on the whole force. Getting out, he loaded his shotgun that I shit you not had the name Old Betsy and leveled it at the fleeing bandits. Bang! The first went down. He reloaded. Took aim and bang, the second went down. Reloaded again, took aim and bang, the third went down. The first two had been Helms and Hill, who hadn't been hit until now and were still strong enough to get up and hide in a nearby forest before Bradford could get another shot off. Ratliff, who had sustained no fewer than 6 gunshot wounds, was unable to move himself and he was arrested at the scene. Last Christmas. Thanks to the wrath of old Betsy, Helms and Hill weren't going to make it far and got tracked down in a town called Graham. By now they were so exhausted that they didn't even put up a fight, simply submitting to the arresting officers. Ratliff was joined in hospital by his companions and all 3 men made a full recovery. Each would face trial as soon as they were fit to do so. Helms was the second to recover and the second to stand trial. He was identified by witnesses inside the bank as the man who shot Sheriff Bradford and Deputy Carmichael. After unsuccessfully pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, good luck with that one, the judge convicted him of murder of an officer of the law and sentenced him to death by electric chair in February 1928. His sentence was carried out on September the 9th, 1929. There was 18 months between conviction and execution. It'd be like 18 years these days. Wichita was the third to stand trial and pled guilty to armed robbery, taking the stand against himself. He was convicted on all charges, spared the death penalty, instead being given a 99-plus-year sentence to be served in a maximum security prison. He managed to escape 3 times in the coming years, but was recaptured every time. After the third attempt, he calmed down and became a model prisoner, being paroled in 1948. Wow, he only served like 18 years, 19 years. That's kind of crazy. Like, you got a 99-year sentence and tried to escape 3 times. Normally, I'm like, they get huge prison sentences. The other guy got the death penalty. This guy made out incredibly well. Following parole, he moved to a different part of the United States, changed his name, and went on to become a reformed and productive member of society, dying in 1994. Good for you, mate. Lewis Davis died in hospital several days after the robbery. When speaking to police, he stated his only reason for joining the crew was to have a little extra money for Christmas. Sheriff Bedford died 12 hours after the robbers fled, and Deputy Carmichael died several weeks after due to complications with his treatment. Now, I feel bad for saying, good for you, mate, the guy. No, if someone goes to prison for a long time, serves their debt to society, and then becomes a reformed member of society, I feel like that is a very rare success for that person and the prison system, and good for them for being reformed. That's fine. In spite of being shot 6 times, Ratliff would be the first of the robbers to recover and the first to stand trial. There was some doubt as to whether his case would see a conviction, seeing as Ratliff was wearing a disguise the entire time. However, that little badass that he took hostage saw to it that he didn't get away. 10-year-old Emma Robinson testified, identifying Ratliff as the man dressed up as Santa Claus. Excellent. He pled not guilty, but was sentenced to 99 years in prison for armed robbery. Many were upset with this verdict as they wanted him to get the death penalty, but there was insufficient evidence to convict him for the death of the sheriff. I feel like that would be different today because there are those gang laws, right? Where it's like I know how it works in the UK, or at least I vaguely do, is that if you're taking part in a violent crime and you reasonably foresee that someone could kill someone in the crime and they do, you're also guilty of the murder. Something like that. So I think this guy would have fried, if that law had existed, right? Because people died in the commission of this violent crime. I don't know if that's true in America. I think it is. I think there's similar anti-gang laws. Ratliff wasn't happy with his sentence, though. Are you going to appeal and get the death penalty? Because that would be a mistake. You got to be careful. He appealed several months later, going for an insanity defense. Not only did this not work, but when the judge reevaluated the case, he found that there was enough evidence to prove that Ratliff did, in fact, have a hand in the murder of the sheriff and changed the sentence to death by electric chair. Dude, that is the risk of appealing your case. Where people really want the death penalty, you're like, I'm going to appeal. It could go the other way, right? Don't appeal. Just be like, thank you very much. Maybe 19 years of my 99. Let's go. The original date had to be postponed to the 18th of November because Ratliff had to settle a lawsuit regarding the attempted carjacking of Woodrow Wilson's Oldsmobile, a transpiration that infuriated the general public. As his execution began to draw near, and for reasons only known to him, Ratliff began to feign paralysis. He managed to convince his jailers that he was indeed paralyzed, and he began having to feed and bathe him. His execution was to take place in a small jail where he was being held, and not an actual prison because, Texas. This meant that many of the townsfolk who were eager to see him executed could literally see it happening through a window. Oh my. Although people watch people getting executed through a window these days, don't they? I've seen that not the electric chair room, the lethal injection room, and there's that big glass thing and they draw back. I think I've mostly from movies, but it's like, goddamn, so creepy. As his executioners began moving him to the chair, Ratliff seized his final opportunity, jumping out of his chair as he grabbed a revolver from the desk near his cell, shooting one of his jailers. Turning his sights on the other, he aimed, but the jailer rushed Ratliff and managed to avoid getting shot before slamming him to the ground and beating him restraining him. All of this was witnessed by the spectating crowd who were unable to intervene thanks to the jail's locked door. Because of the death of one of the jailers, Ratliff's execution had to be postponed again, and the public were now at breaking point. That's crazy. He manages to kill one of the people who's executing him, and that means he gets a stay of execution because they have to prosecute him for this. That's crazy. The following morning on the 19th of November, a crowd began to form outside the jail. They're going to kill him, aren't they? And by nightfall, it had swollen to nearly 2,000 people, all clambering for Ratliff's blood. Finally, their restraint broke and the mob forced their way into the jail. They found the keys and dragged Ratliff out onto the street, binding him with ropes and carrying him to an empty lot behind the local theatre. The crowd there threw a rope over a telephone wire, tied a noose into it, and strung Ratliff up. He was let down several times, once when the knot came undone, before finally being left to hang until dead. His last words were, "Forgive me, boys." Oh my good lord, that is a wild ending to this story.
Well, Merry Christmas.
Let's wrap up. So remember this, my criminologically inclined friends, that when Santa comes to town, it may be for his own ends. He may be robbing a bank or just stealing the goodwill, doing it for the money or perhaps for the thrill. Usually he brings gifts, but occasionally he will not. And that may just be the year that you have to call SWAT. So leave out some warm milk and remember your stocking. You don't want to make a mistake when Santa comes knocking. Thank you for joining us on this not so light-hearted tale. There's just no Christmassy way of recounting a lynching, unfortunately. However, I do hope you enjoyed, and whether you celebrate around this time of year or not, I bid you some good rest over the holiday period and a very happy new year. Yes, and from me as well. Thank you for watching or listening.